Hello everyone, welcome back to my video series talking about Classic WoW Best in Slot for PvP. This is part 2 covering the Warlock. The last video talked about Phase 2 gear being the blue PvP gear and Molten Core gear. And this video is covering Phase 3 where we have access to BWL gear as well as the Epic PvP gear. In this video we're going to be going over a few different sets you can go for, and the main differences between them is set bonuses. Similar to the last video where there were sets where you go for more tier 1 or more PvP gear, that's going to be the case in this video as well. You can go more into PvP gear or you can go more into tier 2 depending on what set bonuses you prefer. With that said, in this video we're going over every slot, but first I'm going to start with the off pieces. When I say off pieces, I mean not the main 8 sets of gear that can contribute to tier bonuses, being the belt, boots, bracers, gloves, legs, chest, helm, and shoulders. First I'm going to go over everything else because that's a little more simple because you're not considering set bonuses. But let's get started. So starting over here on the left with the neck, we're still using the same neck from Phase 1, Choke of the Firelord. Nothing of note is released in BWL for casters for PvP. Similar to the last video, if you don't have Choke of the Firelord, there are a few alternatives that just are not quite as good. You have another neck from MC, Choker of Enlightenment. It's basically just a worse version of Choke of the Firelord. You gain a little bit of stamina and spirit, but you lose 16 spell damage, so it's just a worse version. And then I would say the only other neck you should really consider is this one from Strathdome. I would say this is worse than both of the rating necks, but it still gives you good stats, stamina, spirit, and it gives you 1% hit. You do want to try to gear for PvP hit cap being 6%, but not at the loss of this much spell power. This is definitely a downgrade, but still a decent alternative if you don't have either rating neck. But at this point, I would hope that you would at least have Choker of Enlightenment, if not Choke of the Firelord. Moving down, we get a pretty nice cloak upgrade from the previous phase, Cloak of the Broodlord. This may be difficult to get because it drops from Nefarian and it's also PvE best in slot, but it's just a very good cloak. The alternatives, I would say there's only 2 worth considering, being the 2 that you were using last phase. This is definitely the best, but if you don't have this quite yet, the cloak from Onyxia is your next best, Saffron Drape. It gives you same amount of stamina, more int, some resistances, but half the damage. Then I would say if you don't have either of these, the only other worthwhile cloak that I would recommend getting is the PvP cloak for AV rep. Very easy to attain, and it's basically the Saffron Drape but minus the intellect. So not much worse than the Onyxia cloak, but a fair amount worse than the new BWL cloak that we have access to in Cloak of the Broodlord. Moving on down, move to the rings. So now we have 2 new rings actually. We're not using the MC rings or previous phase rings, provided you can get these. Band of Force Concentration is definitely the best, and this is what you wear always. It has 9 stam, 12 int, 21 damage, and that 1% hit, helping us get closer to that PvP hit cap, which is very valuable. The other ring that we have access to is another very good PvP ring, Band of Dark Dominion, 12 stam, 6 int, and 33 shadow damage. Now, one thing I will mention before anything else is that if you're playing Destruction Warlock, like Flag, Deep Destro, this is not a good ring, which is actually my PvP spec that I'm playing. So if you're not playing Affliction or Demonology, I would just use Ring of Spell Power instead of the new Shadow Ring, because you're primarily casting fire spells. But just for the simplicity, and I'd say most people are playing Affliction or Demonology in PvP, it seems like. We're going to put back on the Band of Dark Dominion. I'd say that applies to more people. But just keep in mind that this is shadow damage, and if you're playing Destro Warlock, you're much better rings than this. No matter what spec, you still want this Band of Force concentration though. And if you don't have either of these or Ring of Spell Power, just like the previous video, your alternatives are for flat spell damage, you have the Band of Orgrimmar, or what is it called? Eye of Orgrimmar. 7 int, 4 spirit, 18 damage, or the Maiden Circle, which is pretty much the exact same thing as the Eye of Orgrimmar, just 2 spirit, an increased 2 spirit compared to the Eye of Orgrimmar, but this one is a BOE and very expensive. So if I already have Eye of Orgrimmar, I personally would not spend the gold on Maiden Circle because it's such a minuscule upgrade that it's not worth the 500 plus gold that is probably going for. Or another alternative, I would say a slight downgrade to those, being Underworld Band for your second ring, unless you're playing Destruction, where instead of a shadow damage ring, you can go for, just like the last video, Flaming Band, 24 fire damage, and random enchantment being like of the Eagle, of the Owl, of Stamina, or whatever. And then finally there's the Ring off Ragnaros, which is kind of a meme because it has no spell power, but I do still think it's a pretty decent ring. 13 stam, 23 int, which is about half a crit, and 10 spirit. So this isn't awful either. But let's go back to Band of Dark Dominion, because I'd say this, unless you're playing Conflag, this is your next best ring for sure. Trinkets, just like the last video, I'm not going to go over in depth. You want a whole bunch of trinkets, engineering trinkets, utility trinkets, damage, static damage trinkets, on-use damage trinkets. One thing I will note is that we do get access to a very good trinket. Nels tier. 44 damage and 2% hit. This is an awesome trinket. If you don't need 2 on-use trinkets, this is 100% the one you're using for your static trinket slot. Neltharion's tier, very good. Actually, before I move on to weapons, I do want to mention one more ring. Not as good as these, but this comes out in BWL as well. Another alternative. Instead of the 18 damage that you find on Eye of Orgrimmar or Maiden Circle, this has 19 damage and a little bit of MP5. Not a great ring, but if you're kind of struggling getting good rings, this isn't awful either. Ring of Blackrock. Moving down to the weapons. Wand, last phase I recommend is Storm Rager because of the speed, 1.3 speed, 8 stam, and 5 int, I believe. But now I would recommend Dragon's Touch. It is slower, which is bad. It's not as effective at casting time pushback reduction, but the stats are just better. It has 1 less stam, but it has 7 more intellect, and it gives you 6 damage. And it's just a harder hitting wand, 95 DPS compared to 62. I would say those benefits outweigh the fast speed of Storm Rager. I would use Dragon's Touch in this phase. Another alternative similar to the last video from Skullomance, Bone Creeper Stylus, not bad either. 4 intellect and 11 damage compared to 7 stam, 12 and 6 damage. Definitely not as good, but not awful either. And the weapons, if you're getting rank 14, you definitely want this. 72 damage, 1% crit, 14 stam, 8 int. until you get rank 14, or if you don't want to get rank 14, I'm going to assume in this video that if you do care about PvP, you're at least getting rank 13 for the gear. But maybe not everybody wants to go all the way to 14, because the difference between 13 and 14 is fairly significant. So an alternative to this is Claw of Chromagus. If you look at this one compared to the Spellblade, you lose 7 stamina, you gain 9 intellect, you lose the crit, you lose 8 damage, but you gain a little bit of MP5. This is also a very good one-hander. Not as good as the High Warlords by any means, but it's definitely the next best. What other weapons are in BWL? Let's see. Now, as far as the stats are concerned, Staff of Shadow Flame is arguably better than rank 14 plus offhand. 24 stam, 29 int, 18 spirit, 2 crit, and 84 damage. But like I said in the last video, I really would try to stay away from staffs in PvP. There's too much utility in the offhand slot that you're losing out if you really just go for a staff. So let's go back to the rank 14. And then offhands. There's actually some interesting choices for offhands. I would say the default best one is just the rank 14 offhand. It gives you 17 stam, 16 int, and 20 damage. It's pretty well statted offhand. However, the AV offhands are still very good in the meanwhile. You lose the stam and int, but if you go with the one that I recommend, the one that is not just fire or shadow damage, it's just spell power, you get 33 spell power. I would say this is not as good as the rank 14, but until you get rank 14, this is what I would still be using. Let's go back to rank 14, then let's compare it to another one that I think is very good as well. So this offhand you get from turning in the Head of Nefarian. I would say this is pretty much equal to the rank 14. However, this may take some time to get because similar to the Onyxia head, where it was very good for melees and not nearly as much for casters, it's the same case for the Nefarian head. That is going to pretty much go to melee first. It's not going to really go to casters until all the melee have them. But when you compare this to the rank 14 offhand, you lose 7 stamina, you lose 2 intellect, but you gain 8 spell damage. I would say that that trade is really personal preference. It's hard to really say if one is better than the other. It's kind of a personal preference thing, but with that said, I wouldn't really worry about this offhand too much if I'm getting rank 14 because they're very comparable. And this one is just you buy it from a vendor if you can get rank 14. But yeah, that is pretty much all the non-potentially tier gear. We have the same neck as last phase. We upgrade our cloak. You get much better weapons if we're going for rank 14. If not, you're using the Master Dragon Slayer Orb or the AV offhand, and you're using Claw of Chromagus. Well, we get a pretty nice wand. Trinkets, you have 1,000,000 of them, but this is an amazing one that you can get. And then our rings get a pretty sizable upgrade. But like I said, if you're playing Destruction, you don't want Band of Dark Dominion. You instead want to use Ring of Spell Power. But you definitely want this Band of Force Concentration. But with that said, let's get into the interesting stuff. And that is all the other gear, the tier gear. So I have a few different sets pulled up that kind of change out what you're going for. As a rule, it seems as though when comparing the epic PvP gear to tier 2, they're very close. However, in most circumstances, for most gear pieces, I would say that the epic PvP gear slightly outperforms the tier 2 in that typically the stamina int is a little bit higher for the PvP gear. The damage is either the same or plus or minus just a couple. But one thing that is notable with the PvP gear is that the armor value is very high compared to the tier 2. So when fighting like rogues, warriors, hunters and stuff, armor as a clothy, getting bonus armor does really help with that damage mitigation, as opposed to like someone who's wearing plates. If they have an extra 100 armor, it really does nothing, but for a clothy, it does make a pretty significant difference. But as a rule, the epic PvP gear in the tier 2 is very similarly statted. So let's kind of get into which pieces you may want to use PvP or tier 2 gear. So right now what I have pulled up is just all the PvP gear, all 6 out of 6 PvP gear. And then for the other 2 slots that aren't taken up by the PvP gear, we have tier 2, being the belt and bracers, which there is not PvP gear for. However, that may not be the best setup, because let's think for a moment on the tier sets. So for the PvP gear, the 2 set, 20 stamina, very nice. You're always going to wear a 2 set. The 3 set, reduces cast time of Immolate, also nice, especially for destruction, but still valuable for affliction and demonology. And then if you wear all 6, you get the 23 spell damage 2 set. But what is interesting is that if you look at tier 2, the 3 set is 23 spell damage. So it is the exact same thing. So let's imagine for a second that if you take one piece of PvP gear off and replace it with tier 2, then you're not losing anything. Like, you're losing this set bonus, but you're gaining this one. It's the same thing. So if you were to do that, I would recommend simply doing this. We just swapped out the chest. Though I said the PvP gear is typically maybe just a hair better than the tier 2 for PvP, I actually do think that the tier 2 chest may be slightly better. And then there's another added benefit that I'm going to talk about in just a minute. So let's compare the chests. So the tier 2 compared to the PvP. So right now we have tier 2, and if we swap over to the PvP gear, you see that we gain 4 stam, we gain 8 intellect, we lose 8 spirit, fire res, nature res. The spell damage is the same, but we lose 1% crit. So in my opinion, the 1% crit is more valuable than the little bit of stamina and intellect. But then you have to think of the armor as well. 77 armor difference between the two. But I do still value the 1% crit more, especially for Destruction Warlock. So I kind of maybe baited you all in the very beginning where I was talking about, oh, this is my video on PvP BIS, and I have all 6 PvP. I actually would probably wear 3-piece tier 2 and only 5 out of 6 of the PvP gear, because I'm not really losing that 23 spell power set bonus because I'm gaining it right here. So actually I think that like this is the best right here. But that's not the only option, and I'm going to talk about another alternative. So actually right before I get into that, I mentioned that there's kind of another benefit to making the swap between 6 and 2 and going 5 and 3. And that is, you can much more easily put on your Goblin Rocket Helm, which is amazing for PvP. So now, if you're wearing, instead of 6 and 2, if you're going 5 and 3, you can take off the helm and you still have 3 set, and you still have the 3 set here. You're not losing any set bonuses by taking off your PvP helm and going to Goblin Rocket helm. So that is an added benefit as well. So really, this is the gear set I would go. We get 3 set for each set, 5 PvP, 3 tier 2. But then there's another way to go, and that is actually taking off even more of the PvP gear and putting on more tier 2. So this set gives you the 5 set for Nemesis, which is just an upgraded version of the 5 set for tier 1. Tier 1 was 15 stam and 100 spell resistance for your pet. And this is 20 stamina and 130 spell resistance for your pet. This is a very valuable set bonus, especially for like Demonology and Affliction Warlock that are using Fell Hunter, especially Demonology Warlock, because this stacks with the talent of Demonology that gives you 60 all res for your pet. So this just makes your pet much harder to deal with for casters. And if you look at the stat differences, we're taking off some PvP gears, but we do still maintain the 3 set, which is nice. But between the last set I was just discussing, 5-piece PvP and 3-piece tier 2, the difference is that for this set we're switching the boots to Nemesis boots, and we're switching the helm to tier 2 helm. Now let's look at those differences and kind of see if they justify the loss of stats for gaining the set bonus. And I would say pretty much yeah, they do, because the tier 2 helm, when compared to PvP helm, if you look at PvP helm, it has 30 stam, 24 int, 32 damage. PvP helm, not far off, still has the same 32 damage, but instead has 26 stam, 16 int, and then a few other things. So this is pretty much the same. I'd say the only real difference is the armor, but do you value that more than like gaining 5 set? I would say no. And then the boots, tier 2 being 20 stam, 17 int, a couple other things, and 23 damage, compared to 22 stam, 13 int, and 26 damage. Overall, I would say the Nemesis boots are slightly weaker, but not very much so. They're pretty much the same thing. So I kind of baited you all again. I said, no, not full PvP. You want to wear only 5 of PvP and then swap for 1 more piece of Nemesis so that you can switch out for Goblet Rocket Helms so much easier. But then I baited you again, because now I'm saying actually what I would consider BIS is 5-piece Nemesis and 3-piece PvP, because there's no, with the last phase with the blue gear, you needed 4 set to gain the Immolate, but now with the epic gear you only need 3. So you're not losing anything going from 5 pieces of epic gear down to 3. You're not losing any set bonuses, but you're gaining a new set bonus, the 5 set. The only problem with this setup is that if you do want to put on Goblin Rocket Helm, let's do that for example. So if you're wearing this set but then you go Goblin Rocket Helm, you lose the 5 set. So what would you do? Well, you could swap out one of these 3 PvP gears for Nemesis. So that being the General's Dreadweave Pants, the gloves, which you definitely don't want to take off because of the equip bonus, which is unique, or the shoulder, and then swap it out for tier 2. But if you do that, then you lose the Immolate casting time reduction. But for Affliction and Demonology, I would say that is not a huge deal. Whereas with Destruction, what I would do, let's say I'm wearing this set, but then I want to go Rocket Helm. With Destruction, I would just sacrifice that 5 set in most circumstances and maintain my 3 set PvP. But for Affliction and Demonology, I would say if you are putting on Goblin Rocket Helm, if you're playing the 5 set tier 2, I would take off one of these and put swap it out for Nemesis. And between the two, let's look at them. The shoulders, I would say the PvP gear is better for each of them. The shoulders, you lose a little bit of spell damage and stamina, but that's also the case for the legs. So it's really personal preference. The difference in stats between them is very close, whether you're going from PvP shoulders to tier 2 shoulders or PvP pants to tier 2 pants. So there's this option, or you can go back to the PvP shoulders and swap back to your good old Ragnaros tier 2 legs, which actually does have 2 more damage than the PvP legs, but you lose some like stamina and stuff. So if you're going Rocket Helm, this is probably what I would do. I would just swap the legs for tier 2 legs if you value maintaining that 5 set over maintaining the 3 set PvP gear. But let's go back to what we had going on. Nemesis skull cap, and then this is supposed to be the PvP. But yeah, I would say these are really the sets that you are looking at. I would say 6 out of 6 is decent, but if you have access to everything, I would wear 5 out of 6 PvP, 3 set tier 2, so that you can put on Goblin Rocket Helm much more easily. And you have that option, and then the other alternative I would say is 5 set tier 2 and 3 piece of the PvP gear, but equipping the Goblin Rocket Helm proves to be slightly difficult. But like I said, not impossible, you just make a swap. But yeah, that's the video. We get a lot more powerful with this gear. The PvP gear and tier 2 gear is both awesome for Warlock, and we get some new rings which are very nice, and yeah, we just become pretty significantly more powerful in this phase than the last. But thank you for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and stay tuned for the next video talking about phase 4 where we get ZG gear. Thanks again for watching.